guys!
Hey guys! It's been a while for My Angelica.
Everyone's favorite book, right?
We know you all love it, don't lie.
So, we're breaking from what we did before, which was reading 3 chapters at a time, to now just reading 1 chapter at a time, because our videos are getting really fucking long. So, Coffee here is going to be our official Angelica.
Yay!
So, we are on chapter 7. Coffee is going to read.
Okay. Compose myself. Keep a straight face. Sherry, I said. What do you think of it? I'd called Sherry after I'd finished the chapter. Sherry loves what I write too, even better than George does, I think. Sage, it's wonderful, Sherry said. What a romantic story. I absolutely love Angelica's lover. If I could find me a man like that, I'd keep him. I laughed. You sound 30 years old. Sherry heaved a sigh. What does Mr. Clinical think of the story? I haven't read it to him yet. I twirled the phone cord around my finger. I'm walking over to his house as soon as we hang up. I don't know what you see in him, Sherry said. He's not a thing like any of the guys in your stories. To me he is, I said. Sherry and I have always had a difference of opinion about George. She doesn't see him the same way I do. It must be because you've known him for so long, she said. It's blinded you or something. I laughed a little. I think the real reason is because I have better taste than you. Yeah, right, Sherry said. What you need to do, girl, is kiss him. If he still looks as good to you after that, then he is the man of your dreams. Anyways. I'm not quite ready to, I said. Kiss him, I mean. Hey, Sherry, could you hold on a second? Mom swept past where I swept. She wore a dress that looked like it was in style 200 years ago. The skirt of the dress swished and crinkled. Mom's hair was piled up on her head, and her bosom was squished flat. She had a pad of paper in one hand and a pen in the other. Research? I asked. This is how Mom finds out how her characters feel. She always dresses up in something her characters would wear. Dad wears his dentist jacket, and normal clothes too. Mom didn't answer, just turned and looked at me, her eyes distant. I saw she had painted a large dark mole near her upper lip. She paused, jotted something down, and left the room. Okay, I said. We were talking kisses. What in the world is holding you back? You know me, I said. Oh, wow. And you know me. Sherry doesn't even have to be introduced to a guy before she'll kiss him. I know this for a fact. I've dared her to kiss complete strangers, and she's done it, even when they're standing with their girlfriends. George has to be the one to make the first move. I can't be the kisser. I have to be the kissee. Woman, Sherry said.
Woman!
You do not know what you're missing. After a while, we hung up. On my way to George's, I wondered what I was missing. Missing, kissing. Oh, George, I am missing your kissing. Kissing, missing. I made up this poem as I walked a few houses down to where George lives with his mom and dad. Poetry, like Angelica prose, comes to me quite easily. George was waiting on the front steps. The dark wood of the door behind him made the perfect background. One of his mother's wreaths graced the door. Let's sit in the yard, George, I said when I got up close to him. I've got some great news to tell you, and the yard is so romantic. George raised his eyebrows at romantic, but he followed me to the lawn. The air was chilly, and I could smell fireplace smoke. How romantic are you thinking it is, Sage? George asked. Perfectly romantic to be hearing a perfectly romantic story, I said. The only thing better might be a fire out on the plains. Huh? Just listen. Again. This is it, I said, settling myself to the leaves next to George. This is it. You're gonna love this one. I started reading. The wind whipped grit and sand onto Angelica's once peaches and cream skin. Her blonde hair was a mass of curls that miraculously held itself in place by sheer will, even though the wind was blowing at hurricane speeds. Angelica struggled along the Buffalo Trail towards California. Every step in the patent leather lace-up boots was an agonizing one. Surely, by the end of the day, she would need Band-Aids for her blisters. The twin pearl-handled Colt 45s of her dead husband hung heavy on her hips. If only she hadn't mistaken Ryan for a 3-pronged antelope, they'd be making this journey together. Oh, why had she been so quick to shoot? Why hadn't she noticed the bright yellow windbreaker he had been wearing, the one she wore now, the one with the single bullet hole right near her breast? Angelica wiped away the lone tear that trickled down her dusty cheek with a white-gloved finger. Suddenly she pulled herself up to her highest height. Angelica would not give up. No, it was not her nature to quit when the odds were against her. She had dug a 6-foot grave for her husband with her bare hands and not broken a single nail. She would make it to California, come hell or high water. Nothing was going to slow her down. Nothing. "Westward ho," she bugled softly, mimicking her dead husband's cry. "Westward ho." It was then that Angelica noticed the throngs of brightly painted Indians on the distant hill, their bows and arrows aimed directly at her heart. "Oh, pooh," she grimaced. When I looked at George, I was surprised. His mouth hung open, almost resting on his chest. I could tell he had loved what I read. "It's my best yet, isn't it?" I bowed my head. George was speechless. My lips ached from trying to hold back a smile. If I were to smile, surely I'd laugh at the beauty of my work. I looked at George again. His mouth was still open. "Close your mouth, George," I said. "You're beginning to look like Andrew. There's more." His mouth bobbed open and closed a few times. Then he asked, "More to Andrew?" "No, more to the book." "You've written more than this?" I couldn't hold my smile back another second. I beamed at George. Yes, I have. Close your mouth. Remember the surprise I told you about? I started writing this yesterday in U.S. history. I stayed up all night writing. I've gotten almost 13 chapters finished and more to come. I laughed out loud. I'd never gotten this far on any of my writing before. Usually I start something and then quit because I can't think of any creative ideas. But not this time. "George," I said, touching his arm. "George, it was like magic for me. I mean, my pen practically dripped the words of Angelica's story out onto the paper all by itself." I could see myself in the reflection of George's glasses. My face moved in twin picture images, every once in a while getting caught in the tiny, bright sun reflection. "There's an Indian in this story that—" I stopped. Had almost said, "that reminds me of you." I patted the thick pile of papers at my side, all original Angelica material. Let me read the rest of this out loud." George moved his hands around in the fall-colored leaves like he was swimming in an ocean of bright yellow. "No," he said in a loud voice. "No, this isn't a good time. I don't have time. Remember, I'm going to work." "Yes, I know that, but I thought that was this evening. I thought we were going to be together for the day until my date with Bob tonight." "You're right, but I may have a lot of things to do later. You know how hectic it is before our Sunday newspaper comes out. I probably should rest." George yawned. "Sort of." "George, if I didn't know better, I would think you don't want to hear my book." George bowed his head and looked at me. "You're right, Sage. I don't." I laughed. "I'm going to put a funny character in my book who's just like you are. A tease." My George Indian is very serious. A comic George in my book might work nicely. "What I meant, Sage," George said, "is that there's no time for me to listen to 13 chapters about Angelica." "Well, okay," I said, "but I do have an idea. How about if you go lie down on the sofa and I read you into blissful slumber?" "What?" George's voice went up high and squeaky. He sounded like a second grader again. "I'm thinking of ways to help you rest." "No, Sage, not today. Angelica is too exciting to put me to sleep. So much action. Any other book would probably knock me right out." George stretched his arms way out to the sides and yawned again. "Sort of." Then he stood up. I smiled. "All right, but there's something else I want to tell you. Something that you'll die about when you hear it. Another surprise." "What, Sage?" George asked. He was still standing tall, looking down at me like there was nothing more I could say that could surprise him. The blue of the sky peeked at me through the splotches of colorful leaves hanging on the tree. George offered me his hand and pulled me to my feet. I couldn't stop grinning. "I'm entering this Angelica novel in the school creative writing contest." George's mouth dropped open again. I kept talking. "I would never even have thought about doing it if I hadn't followed you around, posting those signs. If you hadn't had the great idea to advertise for the contest, I would have never had the great idea to submit my stuff. And then when both you and Sherry told me that I should enter, I knew it was the right thing. I mean, if you love Angelica, so will everyone else. Isn't it wonderful? Thank you for the idea." I leaned forward a bit, waiting for a moment to rest my head on George's shoulder. George looked like he might faint. In fact, for a little while I thought I'd have to remind him to breathe. He was so surprised. He was like a fish out of water. Seeing him that way, with his eyes almost bulging, reminded me of Angelica's Indian lover. I pictured George without a shirt, wearing Indian garb, his hair smoothed back from his face with bear grease. I bet bear grease could hold that calic down. I wondered if he smelled anything like the Indian in my story. "You can't do that, Sage," George whispered. I won't let you. Go home, now, but leave this Angelica story here with me. What do you mean? I can't leave this here. The creative juices are running. Flowing, George said. What? The creative juices are flowing. Whatever. If I don't have my manuscript, how can I complete it? Let me see if I can work out any of the bugs for you, Sage. It has a few bugs. Go on home and study. Let me get you the ACT study guide. Concentrate on the English section. And history, too. In fact, I think it's a good idea that you stop writing in U.S. history and start listening. Oh, George, I said and laughed. I love to see him so surprised. I don't need any help in English. You know that. And I've learned plenty of history from reading my mother's novels. Your mother writes fantasy, Sage. Well, it has a lot of romance in it. But we're talking about history, and your mother's writing is all made up. That'll work for me, too, I said. George had hold of my elbow now. He ran me toward my house, 4 houses down from him. He moved me this way and that, squeezing my arm as he maneuvered me closer to home. With all the rushing around, though, he forgot to give me the study guide. Thank goodness. I was taking lots of fast steps to keep up with him. When we reached the picket fence that surrounds my yard, George opened the gate and pushed me through. Thanks for reading Angelica, I said, though I really think I should have the manuscript to work on. Let the creative juices rest a bit, George said, clutching the lined paper to his chest. I don't know if I can. Writing by hand is such an inspiring thing. I waved goodbye to George, but he didn't wave back. He just stood there in a patch of sunlight with my book, looking at me like he'd lost his best friend. It was the weirdest thing. I turned and went into the house. Thank goodness Mom had typed Angelica into the computer last night while watching an old Humphrey Bogart movie. She was pretending to be a scribe for the book she's working on. She can type and watch TV at the same time, and she doesn't really read what she's typing. I'm not a thing like her. Not only do I have to hunt for every key, but by the time I'm through, it's like I've memorized each word I typed. Not Mom. She never remembers a thing. And anyway, to me the computer is not as romantic as colored paper and a perfumed pen. From now on, though, I'd write Angelica the modern way instead of longhand. The end.
Of Chapter 7.
Of Chapter 7.
We'll see you next time, guys.
So fluid that I so consider do it and stop his rage with a hot kettle and a lonely gun. 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 So changed a bit off a piece of good chew. So strange to bury all the bullets I thought were true with a